How's it going, everyone? Today is March 27th of 2024, and in today's video, we will be discussing the remarkable Jesuit and Eclipse numerology of yesterday's disaster in Baltimore, when a shipping container named the MV Dolly appears to have lost power before drifting into a support column of the Key Bridge, leading to its immediate collapse and the presumed death of several construction workers. The Key Bridge in Baltimore was named after Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner in the city of Baltimore. The current Pope, Jorge Bergoglio, is the first Pope to be named Francis. He's also the first Pope to be a previous member of the Jesuit order, as well as the first to be from the Americas. Now, as you'll see, the main symbol of the Jesuits is called the Christogram, which is remarkably similar to an eclipsed sun. And indeed, the Gematria numerology of the Jesuits has tons of alignments to the eclipse sun, the total eclipse code, as you can pause the screen and look at if you'd like. Yesterday's incident occurred 13 days before the second Great American Eclipse that stamps an X over the United States. April 8th will be the date of that eclipse, just a couple weeks' time, coming up pretty soon here. And measuring from that date to yesterday's collapse, notice how this is 13 days on the calendar. And on this channel, we talk a lot about numerology, obviously, with a strong emphasis on the language of Gematria. In simple English Gematria, the most basic cipher, where every letter is numbered 1 through 26, relative to its position in the alphabet, the word Jesuits sums to 103. And in numerology, this represents the number 13 with the 0 dropped. But also notice the reverse alphabetic order. This cipher simply flips the alphabet around so that Z is 1, Y is 2, all the way through A as 26. And with this 86 value in reverse, yesterday's collapse, March 26th, was the 86th day of a leap year. Furthermore, the word Pope comes from pontifex, and we still call the Pope the pontiff to this day. Well, pontifex in Latin means bridge builder. So there's a strong link between the Francis Scott Key Bridge and a pontiff named Francis. Now, this isn't the first Jesuit ritual I've talked about connected to container ships. Down in the description below, you'll find a post I made back in 2021 where I talked about the capsizing of the Ever Given in the Suez Canal. And again, you can check this out. The riddle is very clear. It's a Jesuit riddle, and we see this again in yesterday's story. Now, the Jesuits are the Masonic organization within the Catholic Church, whereas most of my work recently has focused on Yale's Skull and Bone Society, which also has very Masonic roots. And we'll talk about them in a second, but let's start with the date of yesterday's collapse, the 26th of March, or 26/3. This is a value shared by Skull and Crossbones, as well as the word Masonic in Standard Gematria. Standard uses the ancient Hebrew and Greek charts and applies these extended numbers to the alphabetic order. Yesterday's bridge collapse occurred at 1:28 in the morning. 1:28. Well, why does that stand out? Well, also in the description below, you'll find a video I made back in 2022 about a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh that happened the same day that Joe Biden was in Pittsburgh to talk about infrastructure. This bridge collapsed on 1/28, or January 28th. In the alphabetic order, the phrase bridge collapse equals 128. And again, the 2022 collapse on January 28th. That bridge collapse was in Frick Park. Notice how Frick sums to 128 in standard Gematria. Yesterday's collapse at 1:28 in the morning happened 128 days before the birthday of Francis Scott Key, which is August 1st. Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner during the War of 1812, which has the same digits as 128. The collapse in 2022 was 12 months and 8 days after Joe Biden took office. Yesterday's collapse was 128 days after Biden's birthday. Now, this also stands out because the mayor of Baltimore, Brandon Scott, we'll talk about his numerology, see how he was born on the date of the eclipse next month. Well, he took office on December 8th, or 12/8, which happens to be the anniversary of the 1331 eclipse that I talk about so often. In the alphabetic order, the word brotherhood equals 128. And the Brotherhood is the other name for the Skull and Bone Society, the Brotherhood of Death. In reverse, notice how Brotherhood sums to 169. Well, Skull and Bones at Yale had a very special anniversary when the school turned 322 years old last year in 2023. Skull and Crossbones 223. Well, if you measure from that date, October 9th, to the date of the collapse yesterday, you get 169 days. The Star-Spangled Banner equals 1069 in standard Gematria. And once again, this is all connected to Pope Francis. And check out how Pope Francis was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, a city which has this same 128 and 169 Gematria. But this number 169 is significant for another reason. 169 is 13 times 13. And as we talked about earlier, this collapsed 13 days before the Great American Eclipse. Before we talk more about 13, I just want to touch on Key Bridge, the Gematria of 86 in ordinal. Once again, yesterday, the 86th day of the year. In the alphabetic order, Pontiff, or Bridge Builder, summing to 86 like Jesuits. The ship that was involved in yesterday's collapse was called the MV Dolly. Notice how MV Dolly has reverse Gematria of 101. The word anthem equals 101. And when the Star-Spangled Banner was officially adopted as the United States national anthem, notice how this happened during Brown Lunation 101. Every new moon has a number associated with it. And here we have 101. Now, the MV Dali was named after Spanish artist Salvador Dali. And this is yet another example of the Jesuit riddle. Think about the name Salvador. The Christogram of the Society of Jesus, IHS, this stands for Jesus Hominum Salvator. Salvator, Savior of Man. Much like Salvador. Now, what's so wild about this as well is that Salvador Dali was an artist. an artist. Well, the current superior general of the Jesuit order is named Arturo. Art. Salvador Dali was born on 5/11 and died on 23/1. Well, notice how the name Arturo equals 511 in Latin Gematria, whereas the last name Sosa equals 231. As I say in every video, Latin is what I believe the most significant cipher. It's the only one that's not based in the alphabetic order. But this cipher, which was revealed in Masonic texts all the way back in the 16th century, seems to have great significance to this day. And it's just wild that the superior general has the same gematria as the dates that Dali died and was born. This 231 of Sosa, also Arturo Sosa equals 123, like January 23rd. And Salvador Dali was born during brown lunation, -231. Also, Dali was born in the year 1904. This is the same 4 digits we find in the word Jesuits, 1094. But not only does Jesuits equal 1094, Francis Scott Key Bridge also equals 1094. So it seems like this ship was scripted to strike this bridge. Now back to this gematria of Francis Scott Key Bridge in ordinal. Notice this value of 233. This is very, very important. 233 is the 13th Fibonacci number, collapsing 13 days before the eclipse. The Skull and Bones Society was founded in 1832. Now, there's no date given here, so we can only assume January 1st would be the proper date to measure to. Well, that date was 130 years after Yale University was founded in 1701. And if you measure from that same date in 1832, yesterday's collapse was 10,030 weeks later. Remember, in the alphabetic order, skull and bones equals 130. Human sacrifice, also 130. Pope Francis became the Pope on the 13th day of the month in the year 13. Also notice how his ordination was on the 13th. Well, yesterday's collapse was 13 days after the anniversary of Francis becoming Pope. In the alphabetic order, the Vatican equals 103, just like Jesuits. The collapse was also 13 weeks after the anniversary of the Dali's launch, back on December 27th of 2014. And once again, it was 13 days before the eclipse. Now, in Latin ordinal, Freemasonry and total eclipse both equal 130. The capital G of Freemasonry with the 13 as well. So back to this 233, the 13th Fibonacci number, 233. Well, not only does Francis Scott Key Bridge equal 233, but you may also notice that this bridge first opened to the public on the 23rd of March, or the date 23/3, as we write it on the calendar. The number 13 sums to 233 in reverse caps, just like the word bridge. 233 is also the reverse gematria of the Pope's real name, Jorge Bergoglio, summing to 233 in reverse. And when Bergoglio became the Pope, it was 233 years after Francis Scott Key was born. Now, if you've seen any of my recent videos, you may remember that John Fitzgerald Kennedy sums to 233. former president of the United States. This, a number connected to the 1331 code that I've been talking about with Kate Middleton. The first great American eclipse was on the 233rd day of the year. And why do I mention John F. Kennedy? Well, on the same day as this collapse, it just so happens that JFK's nephew, RFK Jr., announced his running mate for his bid for president. And this woman that he chose was the woman who funded his Super Bowl commercial. And remember that Super Bowl commercial, RFK had to apologize because it was in the style of a JFK ad from the 60s. So yes, there's a strong JFK connection to this story. But first, let's dive into more Jesuit numerology. The Jesuit order is also known as the Society of Jesus. In the alphabetic order, this equals 224. And consider that we're currently in the year 2024. Yesterday's collapse fell 224 days after August 15th. August 15th is the original formation date of the men who created the Jesuit order. Pope Francis became the Pope 224 days after Francis Scott Key's birthday. Francis Scott Key died 22,400 days before the birth of Salvador Dali, the namesake of the ship that caused the collapse. When Skull and Bones and Yale had its special anniversary last year, that was 2,240 days after the first eclipse over the United States. Yesterday's collapse was also 22,040 days after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. We mentioned this phrase earlier, Jesus hominum salvator. If I can spell it right here. This phrase on the Jesuit emblem sums to 266. Well, Francis is the 266th Pope of the Catholic Church. And think about the date he became the Pope, 313 of 13. Those are the 2nd, 6th, and 6th prime numbers. 266. Yesterday's collapse was 266 days before the Pope's birthday. Yesterday was also 11 years, 1 week, and 6 days after Francis became the Pope. Well, when he became the Pope, it was during lunation number 1116. Yesterday was also 1,116 months after the Star-Spangled Banner became the national anthem back in 1931. So the Jesuits, Skull and Bones, once again, these are Masonic organizations. Modern Freemasonry traces its lineage to the premier Grand Lodge of England, which was founded back in the year 1717. Yesterday's collapse was 17,170 days after the bridge first opened to the public. Notice how both the Scottish Rite and Freemasonry sum to 165. It's been 16,005 weeks since Freemasonry was founded, and the word collapse equals 165 as well. But when it comes to Masonry, of course, most people think about the number 33, which is said to be the highest degree of Scottish Rite Masonry. In the standard reduction or Pythagorean form of Gematria, which reduces every double-digit number to a single digit, Masonry equals 33, just like the capital G in Masonry's emblem. And yesterday's collapse was 3 years and 3 days after the Ever Given capsized in the Suez Canal, the last major disaster with a shipping container. Yesterday was also exactly 33 weeks after the city of Baltimore's anniversary. The Star-Spangled Banner became the national anthem on March 3rd, or 3/3. This was officially adopted and signed by President Herbert Hoover. And if you check this date, the date that Herbert Hoover died, which, by the way, is the same date that Kamala Harris was born, you'll see that he died exactly 33 years and 33 weeks after the Star-Spangled Banner was adopted. Yesterday was 93 years, 3 weeks, and 3 days after the adoption. Or 33,993 days. Just a lot of 3s and 9s there. And remember, Masonry in reduction equals both 33 and 39. Jesuit General Arturo Sosa was exactly 33 weeks before his birthday. Superior General Arturo Sosa equals 330. That's also 231 days, and again, Sosa equals 231. In standard gematria, the number 33 equals 1515. The MV Dolly was first christened on January 5th of 15. 1515 was the date. So a lot of 33 to unpack with this Masonic riddle here. Yesterday had primary numerology of 73. And when the Dolly first launched, that date also had 73 numerology. Well, notice how Star-Spangled Banner equals 73 in reduction. And in standard, Salvador Dali equals 730, a major sacrifice number. Well, yesterday was exactly a span of 111 months after the ship was launched. And in the alphabetic order, Francis Key equals 111. Yesterday's date, 3/26. Well, JFK was killed on the 326th day of the year. And notice how it's been 724 months since the Kennedy assassination. The word Jesuits equals 724. I mentioned this in another video recently because in Latin, number of the beast equals 724, just like the Brotherhood of Death. John Fitzgerald Kennedy equals 2114, and the ship launched 21 months and 14 days after Francis became the Pope. Back to my first post real quick. A couple other things I wanted to share. And this goes back to Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott, who was all over the media after this tragedy. And once again, this guy was born on the date of the eclipse, 4/8 or 8/4 in the year 84. This means that he turns 480 months old for the eclipse next month. Francis Key sums to 48 in reduction, whereas in Satanic Gematria, a cipher that's constructed mainly around the numbers 666, Skull and Bones sums to 480. The 48th prime number is 223. 223, the big skull and crossbones number. Well, also notice how the Star-Spangled Banner sums to 223. So does the word Masonic. Masonic 223. Pope Francis was born 302 weeks and 2 days after the anthem was adopted. He was also born 32 years, 220 days after Salvador Dali. That's also 1,701 weeks, reflecting the year that Yale was founded, 1701. Back to Brandon Scott. Baltimore's mayor has gematria of 560 as well as 820. Well, yesterday's date, the 26th of March, 26/3, 263 is also the 56th prime number. And next month's eclipse, which falls on his birthday, has primary numerology of 56. In fact, with the S exception, total eclipse, 56 as well. As far as the 820 in standard for Brandon Scott, the eclipse falls exactly 82 lunar phases after the first Great American Eclipse. And Yale's anniversary was exactly 82 sidereal months after that same eclipse. And just to illustrate that for you real quick, remember there's 223 synodic months between every eclipse of the same Saros cycle, which definitely is connected to that 322. And these two eclipses, 82 synodic months apart, Yale's 322nd anniversary, exactly 82 sidereal months after that same eclipse. In Satanic Gematria, Star-Spangled Banner also sums to this 820. And of course, it's all been Masonic since the start. Just look at Francis Scott Key, for instance. Has his hand in his pocket here, which is sometimes seen as a Masonic gesture. In Latin Gematria, the Star-Spangled Banner sums to 779. Well, Francis Scott Key was born in 1779. 779, the same three digits there. And think about his August 1st birthday. Back in 2007, there was a bridge collapse in Minnesota on his birthday. The I-35 West Bridge collapse. And I'm just wondering now that I look at this, how many years after Francis Scott Key that was. Wow, look at that, 228 years. Well, in Sumerian, death is 228, but in the alphabetic order, United States of America has that 228. And the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem for the United States of America. So that's most of the numerology I wanted to share in this video. However, I did just make the decision to go over this big 44 riddle with this bridge collapse. Because the boat yesterday left port 44 minutes into the day, and I kept seeing this number 44. For instance, when they first named this container vessel the MV Dolly, it was 44 guests attended the ceremony, a really strangely specific number. 44 guests. In standard gematria, MV equals 440 and Dolly equals 44, right? And earlier I talked about this RFK Jr. Synchronicity, as he picked the running mate who funded this Super Bowl ad. Well, yesterday's crash was 44 days after the Super Bowl. When Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner on September 14th, it was 44 days after his birthday. And when the national anthem was adopted, it was 4 months and 4 days before his birthday. If you measure from the death of Francis Scott Key to the death of JFK you get 44,144 days. And JFK's death was 404 lunar phases after the anthem was adopted. JFK was the winner of the 44th presidential election. And he died exactly 44 years after an annular eclipse that started in Texas. And he was killed in Texas. If I can find this solar eclipse of November 1919. Yeah, they don't have... Oh, here it is. Yeah, this eclipse begins in Texas, November 22nd, 44 years before he died. Salvador Dali was born 40 weeks and 4 days before Francis Scott Key's birthday. He was also born 4 months and 4 days before the date that the Star-Spangled Banner was written. Arturo Sosa, born 44 years before Salvador Dali. And a lot of this connects to the number 193. The Jesuit motto, Jesus Hominum Salvator, sums to 1903 in standard. And 193 is the 44th prime number. In the reverse alphabetic order, John F. Kennedy equals 193. So does assassinated 193. And when Kennedy was assassinated, he was exactly 193 mercurial years old, which stands out because JFK was a Gemini, which is ruled by the planet Mercury. So there's definitely more rabbit holes. For instance, Pope Francis is from Argentina. And back in 2022, Argentina won the World Cup. And they won the World Cup less than a month before or after the death of Diego Maradona. Oh, I'm sorry. Maradona died back in 2020, so this was a couple years earlier. And I've done work on Diego. If you want to search my channel for Maradona, you'll probably find a couple videos. But notice how Maradona died on November 25th. And measuring to yesterday's collapse was 1,217 days. Pope Francis was born on 12/17, December 17th. This is also a span of 1,218 days, and when Argentina won the World Cup, it was on the date 12/18 of 2022. The MV Dali was 985 feet long, which it doesn't look like it says in this particular vessel. And yeah, I got this from a news story, but Jesus equals 985. Also, I'll end the video here, guys, because I know I'm just kind of bouncing around here, but the word accident equals 157. Key bridge equals 157. And with Fibonacci numbers, Jesuits equals 157. Also with the S exception, Baltimore Francis Scott Key Bridge sums to 157. The accident was exactly 157 weeks after the Ever Given capsized in the Suez Canal. Oh yeah, and the Francis Scott Key Bridge, Baltimore, when you run this Gematria in standard, it sums to 2,101, right? I may have to dig this out here. Where did I put this? The 2101. Come on, Derek, you're better than this. Where did I put this? Maybe I accidentally deleted it. I guess I deleted it. That's so weird. Well, now I got to figure this out. So, 2101. It was 2101 weeks. I believe it was the bridge open date. Yes, it was. Okay. So if you measure from Pope Francis's birthday to the date that this bridge first opened to the public, it was exactly 2101 weeks. And the name of the bridge, when you pump in the Gematria, it's 2101. The Vatican, where Pope Francis lives, was first established on 2/11, or February 11th. And that's the 47th prime number. Vatican, Francis, both 47. But, all right, I think I'll go ahead and end the video there. Thanks to everybody for popping in. Whether you're watching live or archived, I always very much appreciate a like, a subscribe, or a share as we seek to share this fascinating numerology with everyone we can to help them see through the matrix script coding our mainstream media. Peace, love, God bless. We'll talk to you next time. See ya.